fact, the Massachusetts League has taken no positions on any of these questions that we're going to talk about tonight. The end of August, they issued a statement saying that the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts is taking no position on ballot questions 1 through 5 for the November 5th election. League members may participate in yes or no campaigns for ballot questions as individuals, but should not do anything to make the public think that the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts or a local league has endorsed a yes or no campaign. And it goes on to say that local leagues can hold informational forums, which is what we're up to tonight. Our league, of course, has not taken formal positions on any of these. And even though we have a lot of positions that work, none of them address or support or opposes the issues in the ballot questions specifically. So our purpose tonight is to share information. We hope you find it helpful, and we hope that you will ask questions either immediately following the presentations. We'll take 2 questions after each of them, or toward the end of the meeting, depending on how much time we have left, we'll open it up to other questions. So that's where we are. I drew the straw on question 1, so I'm going to start you right off on that. Somebody cut me off if I talk more than a minute, because it's not worth much more time than that. This is the question 1, the state auditor's authority to audit the legislature. That power to audit the legislature does not exist in state law. A yes vote would allow the auditor some authority to audit the legislature, although it's not an open-ended type of authority. A no vote would make no change to the authority of the auditor, and which means that absent the legislature's approval, there would be no audits of that body. This comes to us in a kind of an interesting way, in an interesting time, because the current auditor is formerly served in the legislature and wanted some auditing done. So she is the main proponent and a large contributor to the pro side of this idea. The Committee for Transparent Democracy is leading the campaign. The Massachusetts Democratic Party and the Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance have all supported it. Interestingly, there's no organized campaign against it. And the thinking seems to be, among people who worry about these things, is that the auditor, if the no campaign succeeds, and there's some sense that in this environment where the legislature is not particularly beloved or trusted, that the auditor will try to use the power once the ballot question passes. The legislators will resist, and then the courts will have to intercede in some way. And the thinking is that the reason there's no organized, no support for this or opposition, is that the legislature has far more leverage than the auditor. And when it comes down to cooperation and the mechanics of getting this transparency to happen, we will not see anything quick. It was interesting. I was reading these Tufts University study and watched that webinar that Jeannie mentioned. And it says, one of the things they say is that according to the Center for Policy Analysis at Tufts, the auditor would not be able to examine votes, debates, committee assignments, policy priorities. Other activities in the legislative branch would be fair game, however, including compliance with employee training rules, cybersecurity norms, and purchasing practices. So these are not financial audits in the sense that we think, whoops, am I going to get a letter from the IRS and get audited? It's not like that at all. It's performance auditing. And if the legislature decides to give permission to the auditor, they could do that now. There are 2 main concerns at a higher level. And one is that this is it's not constitutional in Massachusetts. We don't know that yet. That would have to be decided through the courts. The other is that there is a separation of powers that is embedded in our Constitution, our state Constitution. And that separation of powers possibly would be at risk if this would. Is that the timer? No, I had a beep. Would be at risk. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. This is a semantic dogfight at one level, but we may see it come to pass. Any questions? Bernice.
Who appoints or selects the auditor? And is this one person or is this a group, or who are they anyway?
It's a constitutional office in Massachusetts, which means it's elected. In about half the states, it's an appointed position, but in Massachusetts, we do elect our auditor.
Thanks.
Peggy? You're muted, Peggy.
I think you said it would give the auditor the ability to review contracts or purchases.
Not specifically. That's the hope, but the legislature would have to give them the documents they need to do the audit. So it's unlikely that would be one of the things that's audited.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's my time. You ready to go to number 2, Jeannie? Question 2?
Yeah, sure am. Whoops.
Okay, so this is Peggy and Karen. Take it away.
Peggy, do you want to start?
Sure. This is, as you see, ballot question number 2, elimination of MCAS as a high school graduation requirement. A yes vote would to eliminate the requirement that of the 10th grades, the MCAS that's given in the 10th grade, that the children would have to pass it in order to graduate. I understand that it can be given multiple times, and that they can't, to get somebody to pass it. Do you want me to do the no vote too?
Go ahead, and I can add to it after you do that.
Okay. A no vote would make no change in the existing requirement that a student pass the 10th grade MCAS to graduate from high school. The one thing you need to know is that the MCAS will still be given. It just would not be a requirement that a student has to pass it before they can graduate. I heard today that it is I think they said a federal mandate that they have to take it, but the change would be in whether or not it's a graduation requirement. It will not eliminate the MCAS in grades 3 through 10, but simply makes the MCAS score one of the many data points used to assess a student's learning skills. So there's many other things than the teachers would have to consider in order for the students to graduate if this passes. The MCAS prioritizes, the arguments for it are that the MCAS prioritizes development of test-taking skills at the expense of holistic classroom instruction. Many teachers say that they have to teach to the test versus working with, it takes a lot of time versus working with the students. The MCAS graduation requirement creates disadvantages for students with disabilities, low-income backgrounds, and our first language learners, so that it's a challenge for many students that might otherwise be able to pass it because of these disabilities and things like that. The arguments against it is MCAS is a uniform method for the state to assess student learning and readiness for college careers, and it can identify gaps in student achievements of core subjects. The proposed law would remove the only statewide graduation standard, because there is no other statewide graduation standard right now. It's still, again, it would still be given so that these gaps still could be identified. So in summation, a yes vote would eliminate the requirements that the students pass it to graduate. They still would have to complete coursework that meets state standards, but there's no uniform standard statewide. A no vote would make no change from the existing requirement that a student pass the 10th grade MCAS to graduate from high school. And I truthfully don't know at what, other than 10th grade, how long they would have to take to pass it. The big supporters for a yes vote are the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which is the largest teachers union in Massachusetts. The Committee to Eliminate Barriers to Student Success for All, which is leading the campaign in support. Other supporters are the Mass AFL-CIO and Progressive Massachusetts. Opponents are Protect Our Kids' Futures as a leading campaign opposition. Other opponents, as you might have heard in the news, are Governor Maura Healey, the Mass Secretary of Education, Patrick Tutwiler, and Mass Business Alliance for Education. And there's plenty more information, I think, attached at the end here, if people want to look further. It's receiving a lot of discussion on the radio, on the TV. You can't help but be bombarded with this information about this question. Questions? Karen, did you want to add anything?
There were a couple things I just wanted to add as I've done this. There are 300 districts within the state for this. So all 300 would have to set their own standards for graduation should this pass, which is fine because they would be more holistic. The concern in the vote no would be that the standards are different 300 times going. Now, there needs to be, the state needs to find a way in order to regulate how each district would set their standards, and they need to find a way to go over those. The other thing that I would say is it's often been said that we'd be one of a few states who pulls off the requirement for a graduation, and that's not true. There's only 8 states that have high school graduation standardized testing that has to be passed. So we would be one of 8 out of the 8 that would pull out of having it be standardized. So I just thought those are 2 pieces of information that I don't know that is relayed a lot, but should be heard.
Thank you.
So Joanne has a question.
Well, I have an answer. The test is given to 10th graders in the spring. If they do not pass, retest is given, it's coming up soon. It's in late, I think it's next week or the week after, for retests for students who didn't reach the passing level. And then there'll be another retest in the spring. So students have at least a couple more opportunities if they don't achieve what is considered the passing grade. And I can't remember the scale. And this happens mostly in math. They are on what is considered a learning plan, which means they just have to keep taking math until they graduate. They don't have to pass them. They don't have to pass. They just have to take math, or usually it's math that students struggle more with. So there's that, and that would be the same for science. So the tests are English, math, and science and technology. And there's a couple of, there's a couple of options on the science side, depending on how schools order their program. So.
Thank you. Phyllis.
Okay, so Joanne, are you saying that people can just keep taking the test and even if they don't pass it, then they eventually graduate anyway? Or the other thing I wondered is if anyone knows, because I've heard that a lot of kids sometimes who just feel they're not going to be able to pass it, they drop out because they just can't pass it. And obviously we want kids to stay in school. And I just wondered if anyone has any statistics about what the estimated percentage of dropouts there are because of the test.
My understanding is what I read earlier, only 5% will drop out. I mean, 5% of those that don't pass. So you're still looking at a small, because it's like 1.8% that don't pass. So it's not you're looking at a small number. I mean, I think if you were asking an educator that would vote yes for this, the question isn't about people passing the test. The question is the amount of time spent preparing kids to do test taking skills and not to do other skills that show their strength, not look at their grade work or their coursework, to not look at those other things and allow them to achieve in their own manner of learning. Not everybody is a test taker. It's the amount of time spent on test taking. That's the big opposition for many educators.
Okay. And it sounds like from what Joanne said, you keep trying to study for this test over and over and over again, and you might be learning something else in between. I guess I'm giving my bias away. Okay.
Well, and some students, all of our students at my school do pass it eventually. I don't think we've had anybody that has failed to pass it, at least on the second or third try. But some of it is, as Karen said, is test taking anxiety. They're not unable to understand the material. They just have difficulty sitting in that situation. And there are various accommodations that are allowed for students on IEPs. But you have to apply for, or, they have to be included in the IEP. There's a whole section for that. Should the student have MCAS accommodations like separate testing, a one-to-one, person administering the test to them, a couple of things like that, which, some of the public schools might have more difficult, the larger schools might have more difficulty meeting, but almost everybody does pass. It's 10th grade. To graduate, you have to pass a test in the 10th grade. Just keep that in mind.
Okay, so Bernice, I'm going to ask you to hold your question until we go through all these presentations, and you'll be first up.
Okay,
Okay.
sure.
Because I think we want to keep moving. I want to go to 3, which is the unionization of the transportation network drivers, which I think means Lyft and Uber.
Yes, and more, or any transportation driver, just not delivery drivers. And do you want me to go on with this? Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So a yes vote would allow the transportation drivers or sector drivers or gig drivers, whatever term you'd like to use, to have the option of forming unions for collective bargaining, unfair work conditions, those kind of things. And a vote no would just leave things completely as they are. They are not actually, these transportation drivers are not considered employees. They're considered self-contractors. So that's kind of the issue. There is a lot of wordage and a lot going on inside of the ballot question to read, but it really comes down to providing them the opportunity to do collective bargaining and to unionize, providing them a chance to have the state oversee their negotiations, and to it's a small percentage. It's like 25% have to agree to join the union to start the union, and that 25% would speak for the entire set of drivers. And they can cross driving. The union could be a Lyft driver and an Uber driver and another driver. And I don't know that, honestly, the other names of all the driving companies, but apparently they are more. So there's a lot that goes with it. It is something that similar passed in the state of Seattle once upon a time, but it got into a lot of legal issues and it kind of just got tabled. But it would allow the drivers to bargain, pretty much. I mean, it's really, there's a lot to it with the labor practice laws and all of that. And honestly, just to say to you, there's, if you could read more about what all the collective bargaining and stuff means, go back and read what the laws that were passed this year by Maura Healey. It's still a desire for many of the drivers to have a union. And it's whether this passes or not passes, whether they will move forward. I hate to sum it up that quickly. It doesn't have a lot of the people who are saying, hey, we put a lot of money into this or anything. It's just coming forward and saying, can we at least attempt to unionize? Can we not? Does anybody have questions on this one? I feel like this is a quick one, but it just has a lot of wordage.
Phyllis,
Okay, sorry. So actually, so the drivers actually want this. I mean, when I first saw this, I thought, oh yes, the drivers would want this. But then I had read articles, but maybe it's misinformation, that overall they didn't want it. But you're saying they actually do want it.
It's also mixed because with in our particular state, the drivers already get $32.50 an hour. And then they get sick day and they can get into parent leave and bereavement leave. They can get all these things. It's not the case across the country, but already Massachusetts get it. So I actually had 2 Lyft drivers in the past week, one who was in favor and one who was opposed for different reasons. One felt very much, the one who was no, felt that he didn't like the other people making decisions for him. Because he's independent, he can decide his own direction, and worried about losing that independence. This is a different way to go about a union because these guys, these drivers, not the guys, men and women, they choose their own hours and they choose their own time frames. So it's a different situation than a regular employee, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like teachers with the MCAS, some are yes, some are no, and it's drivers with this situation, some are yes, some are no.
okay, Peggy,
If it passes, do they have to join the union?
They do not have to join the union, and that is one of the issues that comes up. But often with unions, when the union is formed, the union still has to represent you. They don't legally have to give you a lawyer or anything if you come in with an issue, but they still have to represent you. They're still fighting for your causes, so they have to represent you. But again, it only takes 25% of the members to join, to form this union.
Thank you.
okay, so that's our 2 questions, but I think as we go through these, I think some of us will have some other questions. I know I do. So we'll go to question 4, which is Ruth Coles.
Okay, this question, as it says, would allow people 21 and older to use certain natural psychedelic substances. I believe there are 5 of them, 2 mushrooms and 3 something else, under licensed supervision, so under the supervision of a therapist, hopefully. And they could also grow and possess limited quantities, personal use quantities of these things. I believe it depends on which substance, how much of it, but it's like from 1 gram for some and 4 grams for others. And it creates a commission to regulate the substance. There is a fair amount about growing your own in the bill. And a no vote just doesn't change anything. There is both a pro and an anti group support group. The pro people have raised over $4 million and have spent all of it. 73% of that $4 million is from out of state. The commissions, the committees supporting the question, supporting a yes vote for the question, are there is a national group in Washington that is I believe the source of a good deal of that 73%. I have formed strong opinion on this question, so I think I'm going to stop talking.
Okay, questions for Ruth? Comments, other perspectives? Okay, Janet.
I just wanted to add few bits of information because I wasn't sure if Ruth was going to be able to attend tonight. So I assured her that I would cover. I was working on a different question, not this one. So I just wanted to say Ruth and her partner did a lot of the legwork, and I just came in preparing to have to potentially talk about this thing. I wanted to add a few details. Ruth mentioned there are 5 substances. This is something I didn't look up until today. It kept referring to certain psychedelic substances, and I thought, well, what are they? Well, this is a real eye-opener because I'm not a big illegal drug user, but 2 of the substances, 2 out of the 5 are derived from mushrooms, psilocybin and psilocin, and 3 are derived from plants. That's why they're called natural psychedelic substances. And one is dimethyltryptamine, which is derived from bark, mescaline, which a lot of us have heard about, but don't have any experience with, derived from cactus, and then ibogaine, which is derived from an African plant. So, and the 2 states apparently have legalized select psychedelic substances, and the community of Somerville apparently has decriminalized psilocybin. Which I think is interesting, although it is Somerville. But that's it. I think there are concerns on the con side about public safety and health issues. This African-derived substance can cause acute cardiac problems. And there also is concerned about, I think we have a summary that says there's a concern about a black market with these drugs if they're available, that people will just be using them off market, off the grid, and they won't be supervised, and it will lead to abuse probably. And the fact is that this is a controlled substance under federal law, so there's some concern that that might lead to sort of tensions between the state if they wanted some, I don't know, federal funding or whatever. And it was known that they are authorizing federal, something that the federal law bans. But on the pro side, the advocates cite the therapeutic value of the substances. They assist individuals who are suffering from mental health conditions like PTSD that apparently can be very resistant to other kinds of treatment. So, but that's all I have to add.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. I do have one question. I don't know if you can answer this or not. The medical community split on this, or are they one way or the other?
The medical community is split. The chair of the no vote committee is a doctor himself. And there's actually a fair amount of underground, of course, research on the pro side.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for this one? Okay. I don't see any hand raised, but
Yeah, mine is.
oh, okay. Go ahead.
I just want to know, do you know whether the American Psychiatric Association has taken a stand?
I don't know.
Okay.
All right. If you ever find out, Bernice, let us know.
Okay.
So are we done with 4 for the moment? We've had 2 questions, so let's move on to 5, which is the minimum wage for the tipped workers. And that was Susan and Janet.
Right. So let me, just define that your tip workers are staff in restaurants and hotels, hairstylists and manicurists, and there might be some others that I'm not aware of. My comments will generally be directed toward wait staff in restaurants. So right now, the law says that tipped workers are guaranteed a minimum wage of $15 an hour. And this is how it works. The employers pay $6.75 an hour to tipped workers, and then the tips are counted toward the balance of that $15. So in some cases, tipped workers don't make the full 15. And what happens there is that, let's say they make only $13 an hour, then their employer is required to pay that difference, that $2 difference. So what this bill does is that minimum wage is going to be phased in gradually, starting in January 2025 through January 2029. But tipping really doesn't go away. Wait staff can still receive tips over and above minimum wage, or whatever their wage is during that 5-year period and beyond. What this does is it ends the practice of tips counting toward minimum wage. At the end of 5 years, employers have the option of pooling tips and then redistributing them to wait staff, bartenders, cooks, dishwashers, hosts, hostesses, bookkeepers, and other non-management staff. So they don't have to do it, but it is an option that the restaurants can take. Restaurants are going to face higher costs from having to cover the full minimum wage of $15 an hour. They will likely compensate with a mix of price increases for the consumer. They might add a service fee to the bill. They might reduce hiring and potentially lower profits. And there also might be some confusion around whether or not a tip is a service fee, if there is a service fee. So if there's a service fee on a bill, you're going to look at it and say, gee, I got this 20% service fee. Does that mean I don't have to tip, or should I tip? Tipped workers can make slightly more than they do right now. And I've got 2 different numbers. One number was quoted by Evan Horowitz, the executive director of the Center for State Policy Analysis at Tufts, and that number was $17 an hour. And then UMass Amherst just did a study, and they came out with a number of $20 an hour. So right now, our tipped workers are making somewhere between $17 and $20 an hour. And of course, that varies depending upon where you work. If you work at a Capitol Grill, you're probably making a whole lot more versus if you're working at, I don't know,
Panera.
Bella's or Panera's or Bella's in Acton. Let's see. It could lead to better teamwork among staff, between the front house and the back of the house. It could lead to higher turnover. It could lead to lower turnover. We just don't know. And it is a controversial change in the US in restaurant culture. This is not, that's the culture that we have in Europe, but Europe also has universal health care, and we don't have that here. So for the US, this would be a change in our restaurant culture. I also found that increasing the minimum hourly wage of tipped employees will likely increase state income tax collections, because employees will earn more in hourly wages from which the state income tax is withheld. And the impacts on gratuity earnings and gratuity tax reporting are unknown. There are several studies. There's the UMass Amherst study. There's a Tufts study. There was also the League of Women Voters, Needham, has a YouTube video that concentrates on question 5. So those are some of the sources that I looked at.
Thank you. Janet, did you have anything you were going to?
I have nothing to add. That was very thorough coverage, Susan. Thank you.
Questions for Susan and Janet?
And Janet, yeah.
Ruth?
this tips are supposed to be taxed now,
Correct.
to some degree. If both major party candidates have mentioned that they would want to stop taxing tips at the federal level, would the states still tax tips if the feds don't?
I don't know. I don't think that's contemplated in this question. Janet, do you know?
No, I don't know that. But I know technically what is supposed to happen with tips, but I have a feeling that sometimes there's a lot of cash just kind of
Right.
goes from the table into somebody's pocket, and isn't reported. So
Yeah, tips are calculated based on point of sale systems that we have now, unless you're paying in cash. And like Janet said, if you pay in cash, it's up to the individual to declare those tips or not.
Karen,
So I'm reading the non-management employees, and I admit that I didn't spend a great deal of time on this ballot question, but I would like to know when it says that they're pulling of any tips would go out to non-management employees. Does that mean that it could be somebody that isn't even working in the restaurant at the time?
Yes, it could be, it could include like a bookkeeper. Anyone who's an hourly employee could be a part of this pool of tips.
So it could be somebody who's already making $45 an hour or $55 an hour who's getting some of these tips.
I suppose so, yes.
I'm just curious because I know that when it says non-management employees, that's just a curiosity as to how far that extends.
Right, anyone who's an hourly worker could be a part of the pool.
Okay.
that's in the discretion, I assume, of the employer. As a matter of fairness, some employers might choose to limit who's included in the pool for sharing tip purposes. And what you say, Karen, if somebody's making a lot more money than some of the other employees in the pool, then it seems to defeat the purpose of having this nice pool of money to share among people who aren't making nearly as much. So
did you, maybe I missed it, Susan, and I'm sorry if I did. Did you list the proponents and the
No, I did not. Let's see. So it's One Fair Wage is in support of this ballot question. And let's see, Steve Clark, President and CEO of the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, is against. And I don't see anyone else. Do you, Janet? Support. Oh, okay. So yeah, opponents are the Massachusetts Restaurant Association. Supporters also include One Fair Wage, State Senator Patricia Jalen, State Representative Tricia Farley Bouvier, and Progressive Massachusetts. Those are all in support of.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so those are our 5 ballot questions. Ginny, you want to, put us back in gallery here. People have questions on any of them. Phyllis, okay. You're muted.
So back to the psychedelic substance question. So Ruth, when you were saying the $4 million was 73% coming from out of state, who are those commercial interests? Are these people that like make the products and will benefit from selling them? I mean, who's
The product is illegal. I don't know where it gets made and comes from.
okay? So you don't know who those people are who were.
Don't know. Well, they actually are listed. There were like 5, 4 or 5 over $1 million, or close to $1 million donations from out of state. What I got from the Ballotopedia was actually a $6 million figure. But the ones that seem to get published in the WBUR polls, and here were $4 million, so we'd go with that one. But it was a few individuals who supplied the most of that money, and small donations from in-state made up the rest. So it's not corporations, it's people.
Because I'm really confused on this one. I have a daughter-in-law who's a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She would love to be able to use these in her practice, but I also know 2 psychiatrists, they're brothers of a friend of mine, and they both are very much against this because they just feel it's not written well. And so it almost seems like maybe if it were more narrow and it could be used in a therapeutic setting. Anyway.
Well, I looked in part, it seems pretty similar to the way the marijuana legalization law was written. You know, this cultivation thing. It's supposedly private cultivation. Okay, so where are the practitioners supposed to be getting their stuff? But there is a fair amount of research that supports the PTSD use and other depression, severe depression use. And the FDA is actually, I forget what they called it, but it's some sort of like pre-formal testing for one of them. I think it might have been psilocybin. So anyway, it's some sort of, they're investigating the research that's out there to see if it supports asking for more research and limited legalization, and you know, you can use it to do research on type thing rather than just a pure legalization.
Okay. Peggy.
So currently, any provider cannot use any of these. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what about other states? Is there any information about other states that do or don't allow this? Did you read anything on that? I know I haven't.
Well, the major one was Oregon, and they basically legalized everything, and then completely went the other direction. After a while, I think they just took away all the legalizations.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments, questions on any of these? Bernice, yes, I'm sorry.
It's all right. I want to go back to the MCAS question. And I don't know whether anyone has the answer to this, but does anyone know whether all the schools, public schools in Massachusetts, do they all use the same curriculum, number one? Number two, has anyone seen the MCAS tests, and do they reflect the curricula, or, and also who makes these tests up? Are they educators? Who are the people who prepare these tests? Does anyone know? And does anyone have an answer to any of that?
Can I tell you, so the state has standards, not curriculum. Curriculum is very different than standards. Curriculum is designed to meet standards.
Right.
So within our own district, we could have multiple curriculums meeting standards. I say that because of special education learners and different various learners, you use different curriculums in order to get them to the standards. So everybody in the state publicly is supposed to meet the standards. As far as seeing the MCAS, it's changed a little bit, and Joanne can talk about that. It went from being paper and pencil to being more online now. It's a hard thing to say. I don't believe it was a group of educators who wrote the questions. but it was a group of professionals with education background, but not necessarily people who've engaged with children in the sense of knowing about different ways to pose a question. So, Joanne, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. When the test is being given, nobody except the test takers can see it. So that means only children can see the test.
Well, what about
Because
after-
one of the rules is the proctor, the teacher, whoever is supervising the test, cannot in any way assist the kid. There are accommodations to have the questions read aloud, but that is it. It's like if the kid has a follow-up question, too bad. You can just read the question. And so a few years ago, there was a big hoo-ha. I think it might have still been on paper. No, I think it was online. At least our students took it online. And there was a question about the book Underground Railroad, which was, as Karen said, people who worked with kids would have written this question. It was asking the student, it was for an essay, asking the student to take the position of a slave owner and to, extrapolate from there. And some kids really got triggered and stressed out, and they couldn't understand what was meant, but they also could not ask an adult in the room how to approach the question. So no, we do not know what the question. You can see they do release them afterwards, I
Well,
think.
that's what I'm wondering. Is there a feeling that the questions relate to the curricula that's
For
been
the most part, I think they're not horrible, and they're standard things that we've come to expect from standardized tests. So I know usually a question for 10th grade is something like, choose a character from a book that you have read, can be any book, that showed courage, and just and then with a little more prompting, write a 5-paragraph essay on that. So it's not horrible for the most part, but I believe, as Karen says, that I teach kids who've already passed it. So I avoid the whole thing like a plague. And I tried to object to them when I was on school board and, got nowhere. So.
And I just want to add, sometimes the questions can confuse children just because of vocabulary. And one that comes to mind from years ago was they were asking kids about a slip, a woman wearing a slip. And kids today don't know what a slip is.
Yeah.
So, but they can't ask anybody what that is. They're not allowed to ask at all.
And are you actually saying that it isn't educators who prepare these tests?
Well, we're not real clear on how educated these educators are.
It's a group. I'm saying my personal feeling as an educator is it's not people who actually engage with children. They are people with education backgrounds, but they do not work directly with students.
And they may have in the past, but they're not currently in the classroom, as far as we can tell. Yeah.
That's kind of the educators, teachers in the classroom. That's part of the issue. Part of the issue, I should say.
Well, I think most of us are at an age where our children have passed this, and it's a relief. Somebody had a hand up. Phyllis, yeah.
I was just going to say again that I from my own children, from all my nieces and nephews and so forth, it just seems in some grades, I know 10th grade is what counts, but some of the other grades too, like 4th grade, where like the teacher would almost teach all year to get all the kids to pass the MCAS test. And I just felt like so much enrichment was missed because they were just teaching so much to me, because they wanted every kid in that class to get, but boy, the kids definitely passed that test. I don't know. I obviously have a point of view on this one.
Peggy.
Are the different subject matters given tests are given at different times? That's what I thought I heard.
Yes, they do. They don't give math at the same time as science or technology or English. It's all at separate times. Because you keep in mind, those kids are sitting for anywhere from 3 hours to 5 hours taking this test. They're given, yes, and they can have like a mint for a break, and they get to have a break to have lunch. But they're sitting in a consecutive amount of time in one or several days, but taking the test. And they have to be really quiet, and they're supposed to go to bed early, and there's a lot of things that there's a lot of stuff that are telling them how to take a test.
Okay, I think we've got a lot to think about. I don't know when you all are planning to vote. Some of you have mail ballots. Early voting starts this Saturday. Most communities, well, all communities have to have some weekend hours. Most of them are doing Saturdays, so check on that. 6 hours usually. The deadline to register to vote, in case anybody is in your neighborhood and you're trying to encourage them, is October 26th, which is also a Saturday. And people can register online. They don't have to do it on paper. They don't have to go to the town offices. They can just go right online. And then if you want a mail ballot, the deadline for the application to be received is October 29th. So there's still some time if you don't want to go to the polls. So those are some of the things that are coming up. And then November 5th, you get to mark your ballot if you haven't done it yet for all these questions. So thank you to to everybody. The questions were great. The presentations were really, really succinct and helpful. And nobody spilled over into giving opinions. So it was a good league meeting. And I appreciate everybody coming out. Jeannie, thank you so much for doing the slides, being our Zoom master, and everybody else for coming, and get the votes out, folks. Signs go up when, Peggy? You're muted. We didn't hear you, Peggy, because you're muted.
The Wednesday before.
Wednesday before. Okay. That would be October 30th, just before Halloween.
Is
Okay.
it the 30th or the? Okay, yeah.
Marilyn, can I hand this back to you for a wrap up?
Absolutely. I thought it was great. I've been following all these ballot questions, and I have to say I learned some more stuff tonight. So I really appreciate the effort, and I think if we can make this available on our YouTube for other members and people that are not members, I think it would be great. In closing, I'd like to remind everybody that the league has an entry in the Scarecrow contest. So I suggest at some time before the end of the month, you get over there and make sure you vote for our Scarecrow. And also on the 20th, we will have a booth at the Diwali celebration, which will be at the Boxborough Library. And so if you're in the area, stop in. You get a chance to vote for your favorite something, and you'll even get a sticker. So, but that's a lovely event. But again, in closing, I'd like to say how much I appreciate the work that has gone into this presentation. And I think it's going to prove very useful to people. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question or say one more thing? I
Sure.
wanted to give kudos to whoever decorated the ballot box, because that looks so professional and it looks so great.
Well, we had a great deal of help from John, who
Yeah,
did
But it looks amazing.
who built a structure. Well, we had fun. Laura